Asinivuzele sinimukele masala mahle lamhla ekseni ehlelweni Kusile breakfast show. Sithemba ukuthi nivuye kahle nabanempela sondvo lebusisekile nalephephile. Dingemashumi lamabili kuye inyanga yengongoni sekusele nje malanga lalishumi namabili ukuthi singene emnyakeni wa 2022. Good morning. Kukhumbuta nje ukuthi ihlelo liyakhona ukutholakala khona ka YouTube. Singangenjekile ehleleni nasibukena ngombiko losuka khona itiko letempilo. Anzelangeni la itolo kuhlole abantu labangu 1095 kwatholakala ukuthi labangu 322 banawo umkhuhlane weCovid labasesibhedlela labelashwa kubangu 98 siye umuntu munye ke itolo emhlabeni kanti lasebaluleme dinombolo letinsha tikhomba ukuthi bangu 876 active cases wona emiku 9907 bese kuthi isolo wabhedruka nje lomkhuhlane dinombolo tabantu labasebawutholile sebangu 60036 kanti lasebashiyile emhlabeni bangu 1261 lasebagomeke ngalokuphelele sebangu 291828 lesekwenda 25% we total population kanti njengoba sisakhuluma ngawo nomkhuhlane COVID-19 uhulumende welive lase Iran sobike ukuthi sekutholakala umuntu wokuqala ngqa lenomkhuhlane wehlobo lolusha le-Omicron variant kubikwa ukuthi indvodza leneminyaka lelinganiselwa emashumini lamane kubikwa ukuthi bekavakashele live lase UAE kanti litiko letempilo libikele ukuthi lo muntu utholakala namuhla liphindze labika ukuthi kusamonitor lamanye ama cases lamabili lekutholakala ukuthi nabo labo balitfolile lehlobo lolusha le-Omicron variant kanti on the other hand live lase Netherlands lona limemedele ukuthi litangena ku lockdown kusukela ngelisonto lingene ku lockdown kusukela ngelisonto until the 14th of January bese ukuthi itikolwa kumele ukuthi tibe setivalile isibesetivalile nato masinyane kodwa uvala kwecisho yonke into lokufaka ekhathi ema-restaurants, ama-bars, ama-cinemas, ama-museums nama-theaters kuzama kunciphisa kuthelelana kwaloluhlobo lolusha lwalomkhuhlane njengoba tinombolo nje tiveta ukuthi bamhla abaningi bayawuthola lo mkhuhlane i-Omicron variant kanti lokho kumenyetelwe litiko letempilo ngelisonto okuzama nje ukuthi kunciphisa letinombolo baphindze baveta ukuthi mhla ka 24, 25 na 26 December umndeni umunye uvumeleke ukuthi ube netivakashi letimbili sekungashintsha ke lokho nasaqala umnyaka lomutsho kodwa umthetho onyalo lobekiwe ukuthi umndeni umunye kumele ube netivakashi letimbili kanti ngembukeli namuhla nje no sita ubuka kakhulukati WHO njengoba takumla ukuthi bahlale babambe imihlangano nebetindzaba kuba niketa nje the latest update on COVID vaccination kanye ne-Omicron variant sitandlalela yona leyo clip leyo nabasiniketa le update kwanyelo asisibahlele timakaithe sitabene tindzaba defu
Travel, play and inspire. The all-new season of Buhle Bethu is back on your screens with your girl, Nombumelelo Dlamini. Of course, we have a new face in our team, the ever so cheerful Lady Swan.
That's right, Bhumi. This new face is ready for fun and adventure in the beautiful kingdom of Eswatini. I'm so excited to be part of this show in this season. We are the squad that is ready to travel and explore safely in this new normal, the COVID-19 era.
That's right. Don't forget to post your pictures on your social media pages and tag us. Who knows, we might just join you on your next trip.
Join us and be part of the Buhle Bethu squad as we travel, play and inspire every Saturday exclusive to Eswatini TV.
You can watch the latest episodes of the show on YouTube or download the Eswatini TV app to keep up to date.
Asibenze sinemukele ehleleni Kusile breakfast show sivusele nawo lo sanza kusivulela sidabuka tindzaba tetfu. Ingonyama eMaswati silo inkosi eMswati wesithathu sesikhokhela ibutho lengatsha kutsi liye kuyawukha lusekwane. Ingatsha bekathe iphelele ngetinkhani esigodleni engabezweni njengoba beyichamuka kuto tonke tinkhalo telive.
Ngaphambi kokube ikhiphe ingatsha lebeliqhamukisa kilo lonke laMswati, ingwenyama yeMaswati silo inkosi eMswati wesithathu sihole tinkhulungwane netinkhulungwane tengatsha ekugideni umgubho esigodlweni engabezweni. Libutho lende konke lokufanele kuvikela kwanza kwemkhuhlane we-COVID-19 lokufaka ekhathi kufaka tifonyo kanye nekuchelelana emkhathini lisagitsa wona umgubho. Inshisekelo nemdlandla kubonakele ebuthweni lengatsha ikakhulukazi njengoba leli bekulilanga layo lekukhombisa bujaha bayo. Emakhosikazi esilo inkosi eMswati wesithathu kanye nesigodlo bebakhona kutawusingatha imbobe yemhlaba uma ikhokha ingatsha ukuthi iye kuyawukha lusekwane. Ekubeni kugitsane kugiya kufike emaphethelweni, indvuna Comendanyeni Magagula ibe seyithatha i-order lebuya enkosini ingwenyama yeMaswati yaniketa lona libutho.
Utsongondaba nyalo ingatsha liyadzabuka libutho liyadzabuka liyesikhaleni. Ingatsha kakayati kwakwakutsi utsongondaba bawugawula lusekwane lodliwa tindlovu. Libutho lonke nengatsha yonke endleleni social distance. Onke amajaha imaski ihlala ivalile. Ingatsha nalabo labangakajovi mhlaba wonke nasibuya elisekwaneni lonke live liyajova lengatsha tiyajova.
Ingatsha ivele yase iyadzabuka njengokusho kwengwenyama iholwa ngiso silo seMaswati. Kanike ithena idzabuka iphuma esigodlweni la ithela lavele libutho lagcotshiswa ngiwo emafutha. Ngendlela ingatsha ikhombisile ukuthi beyivele ilambele lelilanga lelingcenye yemkhosi wencwala. Ingani nelitulu alikalicethe nani emandla. Lo mkhosi lona ngulemnye yemkhosi lesibuko seMaswati njengoba livele Eswatini liyatiwa kakhulu ngekugcina nekulondolota imihambo nemasiko emhlabeni. Ingatsha ibhekeke ukuthi ibuye nelisekwane lolungadliwa tindlovu bese ilethula isigodlweni elithini embikwawo emakhosi. Etindzabeni kubika Pholile Maziya esigodlweni engabezweni.
Ingwenyama selenkosi Mswati wesithathu sesibusisele sithathu mhlati nge-22 kulesetulu kuthi kube liholide lencwala. Leliholide limenyetelwe indvuna yelitiko latasekhaya umfana nenkosi Lindiwe emhlanganweni nebetindzaba esigodlweni engabezweni.
Ninebekunene njengoba inkosi seyikhokhe ingatsha kuthi yawukhalisekwane bekunene ingwenyama inkosi Mswati wesithathu seyibusisile ukuthi liholidi lencwala litawuba nathi nge-22 kule nyanga yeNgongoni bekunene kuwo lo mnyaka losetulu. Lokusho ukuthi tabe imhla ka-22 December 2021 ngalesithathu bekunene bayethe naphakathi.
Luhlangothi lwetindzaba lomsakato wetithombe Eswatini TV lilethe injabulo longenamkhawulo emndenini wakaMamba kacome intaba ngaphansi kwenkundla yasemathanjeni ngesikhathi linikelela ngekudla njengoba sekusikhathi sakhisimusi.
Hambisana ngco nesikhathi nemoya wakhisimusi disebente ehlangothini lwetindzaba emsakatweni Eswatini TV ngikubanjiswa baphasi balomsakato bahlanganise tandla baseke bathuma libandla kusilimikise kudla netingubo ekhaya lakaMamba lelikaqoma intaba ngephasi kwenkundla yasemathanjeni. Likhaya lakaMamba likhaya lelinemalunga emndeni lalishumi leliningi lawo bantwana kanti-ke kati sewatakhela likhaya etiko lalapha kaMamba. Kusho kwalosabambe kuba ngumphathi welihlangothi letindzaba kulomsakato Siphiwo Dlamini kati kwangathi utawuphoceleleka ukuthi afune lenye indzawo langafihla khona inhloko njengoba umndeni wakaMamba nawo utawufana naleminye imindeni kulesikhathi sakhisimusi kutawuvutha bhe etiko.
Sisibheke lo nyaka asesicala ngomsebenzi ukuthi sibothi la sibona khona ukuthi isimo sinjani sikhona ukuthi eliholweni lethu sikhokha sithengathenge lokho lokuncane kude nje bamani bakhona ukuthi babe na Christmas. Namhla ke lapha ekhaya lapha beJeremia Mamba siyathemba ukuthi Christmas tawuba ngcono lo nyaka njengoba thina selithi titawufaka sandla emakhekhini kude lo mndeni ube na Christmas kulomnyaka. Siyababonga kakhulu ke baphathi bemsakado Eswatini TV ngoba basisekela kakhulu. Sisina sichamuka nalomcondvo bavele nje bathi asigijime nawo futhi base bafaka sandla namhla bakwende futhi kwaba possible ukuthi sitofika khona la phasi kaqoma intaba lapho mhlambe nemoto ayikhona ngena khona kepha nje singenile sefika basesekele nabo bajike esivivaneni kuthi batoletha la. Thina saselitefu vele takutfola lokuthi kunebulukhulu ukuthi bamfana bakhona esikolweni namkhulu akakhoni kuhola ngoba naye akana ID akana certificate. Setama ukuthi mhlambe si-involve ne-Ministry of Home Affairs PS nje uyayathi lenzaba nalophethe le-office le-Home Affairs lashiselweni uyayathi lenzaba solo siyayilandzelela ukuthi bamane basitakale bakhona lokuthi batothola certificate kude batoya esikoleni njengalabanye bantwana njengoba phela sathi kahle ukuthi bamfana lasathi badzinga kakhulu ukuthola imfundo lokulilungelo labo nje nabo bonke nje bamfana mhlaba wonke. So sesemba kusilenzaba batawuchubeka nokuyisukuma etulo sitawuchubeka nathi siyilandzelele kude mkhulu amana abe ne-ID khona atokhona nokhola imali yabogogo nabomkhulu ngoba njengamanje kude lebakuthola kulomndeni leni ngoba kude mkhulu naye lakholakho.
Mkhulu Jeremiah Mamba ubonge wagangatha kubaphasi balomsakade ngekuhamba etinyathelweni temakhosi ngekunakekela labo labahlublile nalabaswele eveni.
Bekunene sibonga kakhulu. Bonga kakhulu uma vele kulesikhaya lelifile lelikhaya. Anabani nathi sengachwala ngisasebenze akunalutho. Sibonga kakhulu bekunene.
Kuvakala kwangasi sento lesifana nalesi sekutawuba ngumahlala khona kuletisebenti tetindzaba kulomsakato. Umbiko uhlanganiswe ngiLington Gule kaqoma indaba kalavumisa.
Libandla lemasheshe selikhumbule umbishop longasekho emhlabeni Elina Wamukoya ngemsebenti wakhe lawendile etindzabeni temvelo. Sihlalo wenhlangano yamasonto ye-Council of Eswatini Churches Bekindlela Magongo uthi umbishop waMukoya bekahlahlandlela etindzabeni tekunakekela imvelo.
Loyo bekakatsa ngumbhishaphu welibandla lemasheshi kuleli Elina Wamkoya washona akusuka umnyaka losetulu ngemumva kwegula ngesifo lesihambelana nemkhuhlane i-COVID-19. Sihlalo wenhlangano yemasonto iCouncil of Eswatini Churches Archdeacon Bekindlela Magongo uthi umbhishaphu Wamkoya waba lihlahlandlele kongena imvelo kuleli eAfrika kanye nasemhlabeni wonke jikelele.
Kwakuliphupho lakhe ke umbhishophu Wamkoya ukuthi nakufika isikhathi sakhe se-retirement la bekade awuhlanganisa khona 70 weminyaka ngaMay kuthi ngaleli langa le-retirement yakhe ahlanyele tihlahla tetithelo letingu-70 thanking God for her life. Njengelibandla lema-Anglicans siboneke ukuthi kuhle ukuthi si launche lesikubita ngekuthi kuseswatini green faith lokunye ke lesikuhlanganise kanye nekunakekelwa kwemvelo ukuthi lenzaba ye-gender based violence nalapho umbishop Wamkoya eSwatini eAfrika nasemhlabeni wonke bekangilomunye webaholi labayi-champion yekumelana ne-gender based violence. So ke i-awareness workshop lelesikuyo ukuthi simabandla eSwatini asithathe le baton kuBishop Wamkoya sigijime nayo ngekunakekela imvelo sigijime nayo ngekumelana nekuhlukubetana ikakhulukati kubomake nakubantwana. Siyacela ke kubazalwane bonke nesive nje ke sonke simane sitinake kunasikhathi lesikuso nasi sifuna kwendlula kulesikhathi sabo Christmas siphilile singemaswati sinesayeya njengemabandla ukuthi imigomo yonke yaka COVID-19 emasontweni ethu siyilandzele. Siyakhutsata ke nesive ukuthi uhulumende phela umjovo wawuthenga ukhona. Asihambe sive siyojova kude lokusono ngemjovo.
Umbhishaphu Wamkoya waba weqala ngca eAfrika kuba ngumbhishaphu longumake esontweni lemasheshi ephansi kwebuholi bakhe emasonto emasheshi lasendasi nesifunda sase-Afrika. Abonakala ihambela embili kakhulu indzaba yokunakekelwa kwemvelo kuleli lisonto lemasheshi latfola tindvondvo letintsatfu kutemvelo Awards Environmental Active Faith-Based Organization ngemnyaka wa 2016, 2018 kanye nangemnyaka wa 2020. Tindzabeni teSwatini TV kubika Fortune Dlangamandla kunalelisiwe Dlangamandla sisembabane.
Sivele singetulu kwenkulungwane emimangweni lemine enkundleni yakalobamba sesitawukhona kwewela umfula ngaphandle kokuba sengotini endzaweni yasengcobongweni ngemuva kokuthi libandla leliphunga tehlakalo i-National Disaster Management Agency inikelele lenkhundla ngetimfo tekulungisa tebetebe kulendzawo. Indvuna yenkhundla Bhekisisa Bhembe ithi lolu sito bebaludzinga kakhulu njengoba sive bese singasakhoni kwewela.
Sive sakalobamba siphume ngetinkani kuyawulungisa tebetebe lowonakele ngenxa yetimvula lesolotina kuleli. Indvuna yenkhundla Bhekisisa Bhembe yithi lo tebetebe bese ungekho esimeni lesikahle.
Kwafika wabola lamaplango ngebuningi lenakabola lamanye amuka lamaplango amanje bekahambe edulu. Ngikubona ke isidingo silamakhala lana bonke lesive lesilana nemasonto langa labantu bawela khona ngebunengi vele maningi lamakhaya ngoba namanzane lapha lesinaye le miti la kanzwenzwe iwela khona lana yakulo manzane somnjalo sinangqobonga basebenzisa lona lo tebetebe lokusho sisetshenziswa imiti lengayabekisa maybe imiti letala kubo 1000 nasihlanganisa seyonke lokusho usidingo sikhanze kusidingo lesikhulu kwelo ukuthi awulungiseke ngoba nabantu abesikole labeda la isomnjalo high school labana nasevalley primary bawela khona la lokusho bese kuyingodi ke kakhulu ngoba lo fence bese kude la sayithini maplango abole onke ngekusidwa ke NDMA National Disaster Management basita ngale material ifake ekhathe emaplango tigodo tipikili libofenisi and then labanye labasitile nosis NL investment ukuthi basiniketele 1000 rand ukuthi sitawukhona ukusita labantu nasebalabasebenzako ngamahewu badle phinde kube khona bakuthola ko naba emakhaya ukuthatheka ngoba lo mango ulimale kakhulu ubotebetebe labanengi bamukile.
Bhembe uthi basahlanganisa konke lokudzingekako kuthi bate ukhona kuyawufaka sicelo sekwakhelwa libloho kule ndzawo esikhwameni sekutfutfukisa tifundza i-Regional Development Fund. Etindzabeni teSwatini TV kubika Nelson Dlangamandla nginambongwa Dube Kalobamba.
Emaphoyisa ecwayisa eMaswati ukuthi awacaphele bozidlani lapho asathenga timvo letinyenti letahlukahlukene ngoba iyakhula imibiko yokugebengwa kwalabo labathi bathenga impahla kubantu ikakhulu leyo lethengiswa etingwendleni tekuchumana eFacebook. Umchumaniso wamaphoyisa nesive ephindile Vilakati uthi labanyenti labagcina badliwe timali tabo ngulabo labasuke bathenga lokusuke kukhangiswe kube tindzaba kanye nasetinkhundleni tekuchumana.
Ngatikhazi temaholide abokhisimusi eMaswati lamanyenti ayayabonakala phitsitela atsenga tintfo letisidzingo kanti lamanye awo agcina atsenga impahla lesuke ikhangiswe kube tindzaba kanye nasetindzaweni tekuchumana tesimanje manje i-social media. Lokuchumanisa sive kanye nemaphoyisa aphindile Vilakati utse eMaswati akacaphele tinswela boya.
Lesi sikubonile sothola ukuthi mhlambe ngemaviki lamabili tinombolo setiyaya kubo 5 tema cases la reportwako la nglohlobo lolu lapho khona abantu bathengile. Lokunye ukhanza ukuthi le ntfo lethengiswako vele nalenkampani lethengisako kukhona kusemthethweni vele bayathengisa. Ubhadare leyo deposit kulama details lo watfolile. Bese kuthi nje ngekuphatha imakweliso sothola i-communication leseyithisa le ushintsha noma akasalungu lama bank details labakunikete wona kani sekuthethe over ke labagangako sebakunika ama bank details lasangasiwo liqiniso so uyabhadala ke yona leyo mali lemhlambe uthona ibalance nase ulandzelela ke kule nkampani ukuthi ufanele singabe sebakudeliver phela nje kwetivumelwano ukhanze sile mali yesibili noma legcina awukayifikisi velele kule nkampani lefanele so siyacela ukuthi sive sengosa sicaphele kakhulu. Sibonile nabo betinkhomo khona nje itolo besebena indzaba yemuntu lebekathenga tinkhomo letingi7 nga34,000 le kugcina kubhadareka vele endzaweni lengasiyo. Siyacela sive sengosa siwahlahle emehlo kakhulu nasitawuthenga tintfo leti advertiswa online sibe nesiciniseko sokuthi sibhadara ngendlela lengiyo. Sinayo i-department emaphoyiseni lebuka letindzaba tetimali ungeta nakithi utocela lona lisito ukuthi bakubukise ungabhadari le mali ukuthi ingabe vele kusemthethweni yini lokho lokwenda ukuze uthi ungatikhanzi imali yakho seyihambe nawo umtilane. Labanye ke lebe bathenga timoto nabo ke banako ukukhala vele imoto khanze sikhona vele kuliciniso ye-advertiswa but sebakutwista la ekubhadareni so uthi khanza sobhadara kumuntu longasuye.
Vilakati uthi kulesinye isikhathi uma umthengi sekathengile ubese loyo lomthengisele so uyanyamalala uphindze wacela eMaswati lasuka adliwe imali kusakakhishimele emaphoyiseni nasemabhange kude awubanjwe imali igcine ijikisiwe. Etindzabeni teSwatini TV kubika Fortune Dlangamandla ngisembabane.
Gogo Esther Vilakati loneminyaka lengu-89 wasendzaweni yaseJabulani esifundzeni saseshiselweni utawubane maholide lamahle njengoba libandla lebanikati betimotolo teluhlobo ma-BMW E46 limakhele indlu lebita ngetulu kwetinkulungwane letingemashumi 21. Mancoba Ngwenya uthi bakhele Gogo Shongwe indlu ngemuva kokubona ukuthi leyo lahlala kuyo ayisekho esimeni lesikahle.
Gogo Esther Vilakati wasendzaweni yasejabulani esifundzeni saseshiselweni ebenebamvana labasithupha kepha labasihlanu sebashona kwasala munye. Nyalo sowuselene batukulu lengekusho kwamakotwa kakhe Kusile Vilakati bayenga emashumini 2. Simo sakhe sempilo asiso lesikahle kanzi nendlu lahlala kuyo ayikho esimeni lesikahle njengoba iyanetha nakunati imvula. Lokhu kwesekholele ekutheni banikati betimotolo telihlobo lema-BMW E46 enhlangano kuthi bamakhele indlu.
Sakhanza umuntu omdala anethwe ngizamcolo amantinteti ingubo tinikiwe kwasithinza safese sashiya bese mshiyela nje kudla kwakhe isimusi sasena sesifika lena la bese siyohlangana khona kuphathi yethu sase siya lase liyavuka leliphupho enhlitweni tethu ukuthi ungathi gogo bese ngamakhele indlu lesimo lesimkhanze akuso simbi kakhulu kude amongst us lo weva ngathi nje angafisa kubona makwakhe noma gogo wakhe kulesimo la khona ke leliphupho ke lataleka khona saseke sesiyanquma ukuthi gogo asifuna aphinza netwe imvula sicalile le project sayicala khona lapho liphupho lataleka khona lapho but sisukumise sicale 1 May uGupi Foundation nje bese igupha 1 May aleli holiday la 1 May.
Kusile Vilakati lo khulumele gogo Vilakati ngenxa yokuthi isimo sakhe sempilo asiso lesikahle ubonge kakhulu kubanikati baledi motolo ngekwesekela lo mndeni.
Sibonge kakhulu empilweni yethu kulenjabulo lechichimako sibonga uNkulunkulu uqobo lwakhe ukuthi nje asentele umusa sivedelelile nani kungathi iminyaka yenu ingaphinzwa nasemakhayeni enu impilo yenu ibe nekujabula nechichima lokukhulu.
Lokunye lokunikelwe ngilabanikati baledi motolo kudla, tingubo kanye nembhedze lokubida imali lelinganiselwa ku10,000 emalangeni. Edindzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Nelsiwendla ngamandla yembabane.
Kudemidlalo. Umqeqeshi welicembu lembabane Swallows Christopher Enen uthi kucala kabi kwelicembu lakhe akumfusanga njengoba bekade ukuthi tinfo titawugucukati bahambele kahle. Enen bekakhuluma ngemuva kokuthi iSwallows ishaye eMalandi Chiefs ngamagoli lamabili ecanzeni emidlalweni weMTN Premier League lodlalelwe eKing Sobhuza Memorial Stadium enhlangano.
Licembu lembabane Swallows lesidlala kahle ke kulamalanga lithonene neMalandi Chiefs libuke kuqhubeka nako kuhlala kahle umdlalo uqale ngekukhumbula umcondzisi welicembu le4-4 Sipho Bhembe losashile emhlabeni emidlalweni ngeSwallows ivele yakhomba ukuthi iyawufuna kusuka uqala umdlalo naye yakhe emathuba lamahle iMalandi nayo bengakade bekuphansi ifunela kayo lekhamba embili iSwallows ithola lithuba lelihle nayithola libhola lebese lisuka emlotheni kepha nalo ihlulekile kulisebenzisa Bashi Muthanda kuyeSwallows ugcina litfola lekuqala ke ligole esigameni sekuqala lekhonile kubambelela kuyeSwallows ayikhefi ihamba embili ngalo lelilothwa icanzene esigameni sesibili kube iMalandi leqala kangcono yakhe emathuba ngekulandzelana kepha ke yahluleka kwasebenzisa Sandile Hlatshwayo utfolele kucedzela umdlalo nakafalela lesibili lembabane Swallows lekashaye sekabukene nelibali wavele waqala kujabula lisangakangeni kungena umdlalo kuphele ngawo lamabili ecanzeni lekathi umqeqeshi wembabane Swallows Christopher Enen kuqala kabi kwesizini naleli qembu lakhe akukamtfusi.
If you could follow me, that is the way I work. Even you can see when I was in Sundowns, something like that happened. I was even expecting the president to even fire me, but he gave me the opportunity, the chance to regroom the team, and then we bounced back seriously. So I'm not surprised about the start, but I believe we are going somewhere. Yeah, because I can't see the team losing again.
Bheka imavuso lebayaqeqesha licembu leMalandi Chiefs ubeke kanjena.
All la magoli angenile kwenye mistakes defense. Otherwise bebadlala kahle labafana.
Kanti kulomunye komdlalo ithambuthi iyathi sola ngemidlala ngemathuba lamahle kuncoba umdlalo wabo nabadlala kanye nayo isibhethi le isibhethi igcine ikhona kuncoba lo mdlalo ngeligoli linye ecanzeni lobekela umsakazo weSwatini TV temidlalo ngiphathiswe Msibi inhlangano
Ngaleto temidlalo siyadephetha tindzaba tetfu asibahlela timakethe sitawubuya sichubeke nehlelo.
Nziki skim sami mayingiyabonga kungadisa ngemvo lebeyingaze ibe yimfihlo kulomunye umuntu ungadise ngesimo sakho sekuphila ne-HIV. Mngani wami yathi ukuthi ngimi nawe waya
mngani wami ukwende kwaba melula kakhulu ukubhokokela ngiyathi ukuthi soze wangihlamula bunguwe bakho uyangikhulula kakhulu emoyeni wami ngiyabonga girl ungikhulula kakhulu kwathi ukuthi wena uyahlala unami njalo
girl sisonke always kuphila ne-HIV angeke kulushintshe nakancane lithambo lwami nawe mnganami yathi ukuthi ngimi nawe sonke isikhathi
kuva kabandi shayela 1212
Watch local TV on the go with the Eswatini TV app for only 20 emalangeni. Come on. Do the most with Eswatini TV app. Download from Google Play Store or App Store. We're good together.
Everywhere you go, MTN.
Bungelthando, bungekwatana, bungekuhlalisana, bungebungani. Luthando lukhona. Ungaphuthelwa lapho tithandzane tihlangana ticoca ngokuthi kodwa tahlangana njani, impilo iquba njani emshadweni, kodwa vele luthando lukhona yini. Kungako sithi love exists.
Emandleni umfata miyashaya phone.
Wangidlula ke. Ngathi wangicabuza asumananga.
Ngaqala ngakushikilisa babe. I forgot to mention that one. I really didn't want this guy.
Love exists. Luthando lukhona.
Alright, welcome back mbukele. So ubukela hlele Kusile Breakfast Trust ekuvusela nawo sekumukele lo sanza kusivulela. Kukumbuda nje mbukele ukuthi kusukela namuhla luhlelo Kusile Breakfast Show lotawungena ngensimbi yesikhombisa ekseni emaviki lamathathu. Sikumukele lo sanza kusivulela. Asike nyalo mbukele sitawufaka yona iclip ya Secretary General enhlanganweni yakamhlaba eTempilo Tedros asiniketa nje update ngomkhuhlane iCovid-19.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. 77 countries have now reported cases of Omicron, and the reality is that Omicron is probably in most countries, even if it hasn't been detected yet. Omicron is spreading at a rate we have not seen with any previous variant. We're concerned that people are dismissing Omicron as mild. Surely, we have learned by now that we underestimate this virus at our peril. Even if Omicron does cause less severe disease, the sheer number of cases could once again overwhelm unprepared health systems. I need to be very clear. Vaccines alone will not get any country out of this crisis. Countries can and must prevent the spread of Omicron with measures that work today. It's not vaccines instead of masks. It's not vaccines instead of distancing. It's not vaccines instead of ventilation or hand hygiene. Do it all. Do it consistently. Do it well. Vaccines are tools that have the greatest impact when they're used to protect those who are most at risk in all countries. In the past 10 weeks, COVAX has shipped more vaccines than in the first 9 months of the year combined. Most countries are using vaccines as fast as they get them. A small group of countries are facing challenges rolling out vaccines and scaling up rapidly, and WHO and our partners are working closely with those countries to overcome bottlenecks. Although we expect further improvements in supply, there are no guarantees, and the hard-won gains we have made are fragile. We continue to call on donors and manufacturers to put COVAX and AVAT first. At the same time, evolving evidence suggests a small decline in the effectiveness of vaccines against severe disease and death, and a decline in preventing mild disease or infection. The emergence of Omicron has prompted some countries to roll out booster programs for their entire adult populations, even while we lack evidence for the effectiveness of boosters against this variant. WHO is concerned that such programs will repeat the vaccine hoarding we saw this year and exacerbate inequity. It's clear that as we move forward, boosters could play an important role, especially for those at highest risk of severe disease and death. Let me be very clear. WHO is not against boosters. We are against inequity. Our main concern is to save lives everywhere. It is a question of prioritization. Who gets what vaccines in what order? The order matters. Giving boosters to groups at low risk of severe disease or death simply endangers the lives of those at high risk who are still waiting for their primary dose because of supply constraints. On the other hand, giving additional dose to people at high risk can save more lives than giving primary dose to those at low risk. Together, we will save the most lives by making sure health workers, older people, and other at-risk groups receive their primary dose of vaccines. In most countries, those being hospitalized and dying are those who have not been vaccinated. So the priority must be to vaccinate the unvaccinated, even in countries who have better access to vaccines. It's really quite simple. The priority in every country and globally must be to protect the least protected, not the most protected. There remains a vast gap in rates of vaccination between countries. 41 countries have still not been able to vaccinate 10% of their populations, and 98 countries have not reached 40%. We also see significant inequities between population groups in the same country. If we end inequity, we end the pandemic. If we allow inequity to continue, we allow the pandemic to continue.
I wanted to ask about the study that came out of South Africa today that showed that the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine was 70% effective in stopping severe illness from Omicron. I think that is lower than against previous variants, but perhaps higher than you had expected. Have you seen the data on this, and how do you think this data could impact your views going forward on the recommendations of a third dose? Thank you.
The data on Omicron and the performance of vaccines is in very early days. Both laboratory studies of the sera from people who have been vaccinated, as well as now real-world evidence on the performance of the vaccines against clinical disease. So we're looking at the report, evaluating exactly what was studied and the results from the report. And I think what's really important to recognize here is that, and we've had a report also, as you know, from the UK on Friday. What's really important is that these are early reports, and there are considerations about exactly who was vaccinated, what the disease severity is. So certainly of significant interest. And we'll continue working with partners on additional reports that we know are coming, because it really is about an aggregate of evidence from around the world. I think the important thing, though, is that really we have to emphasize that transmission of Omicron is not going to be solved by vaccine. Protecting people against that severe end of the disease spectrum is really critical, but we have to be doing all of the interventions in order to assure that we have the lowest transmission possible as Omicron is moving its way through different populations.
This is asking in a kind of COVID variant agnostic way, but what do we have yet on the data on reinfections? Because in the UK we're seeing people becoming reinfected with COVID twice and occasionally 3 times. And so I'm wondering if we can expect this virus to weaken as it reinfects us, and what the data you have on reinfections tells us about how we're going to have to manage this in the long term.
They are receiving a lot of data, and thanks to all the countries that shared the data. The South Africa team have established a well system while they have been tracking reinfection even before Omicron. The initial signal they received was they have seen even before the indication of the genetic sequencing, there was an early indication of signals of higher number of reinfection related to Omicron. So based on that, they alerted, and there are a lot of sequencing done because of that. So we are evaluating that disease, but as it's a global picture, so what's happening in South Africa might not be applicable to other countries. It has different level of immunity, but we are seeing an early indication that Omicron may be giving a higher reinfection, and that's related the one side of the transmissibility, another ability of it to evade some of the antibodies established by either natural infection or by vaccination. But we at early stage, only 2-3 weeks. As we get more and more data, and data coming from a variety of countries, we'll be able to say how much reinfection is happening. But we do have early signals coming from South Africa that's showing the reinfection is higher with Omicron compared to Delta and Beta.
I just wanted to ask, we've seen a lot of data, neutralization assays and so on the immune escape potential, but of course the vaccine data very often is data on BioNTech or AstraZeneca vaccines. There's very little data on some of the other vaccines that have been used to vaccinate a huge part of the world. Are you doing anything to make sure that that data is generated as well? Do you have any preliminary data on any of these other vaccines?
So we have 3 lines of work. The first one is collaborating with all the researchers that are doing animal studies and assay studies and facilitating the communication for protocols, for access to samples, the virus, etc. The second line of work is gathering the information and reviewing every day the new data that emerges. And the third is to have discussions like the one we plan for tomorrow with all the global experts to see what the data suggests. So far we have looked at 13 studies that aim to evaluate evasion of immunity by the Omicron variant. Of all these 13 studies, I can tell you 3 things. First, many of the studies are small. They use different methodologies. And when I mean different methodologies is they use different assays, different convalescent plasma, different virus. So to put them together, you have to spell out a bit more the details so that we can come to conclusions. The second is that they all suggest or indicate that maybe there is a decrease in the neutralization antibody titers, but what is the clinical relevance of these results? We continue to search for that. And finally, I want to say that we are interested in all the researchers to provide data, so we have reached out to about 340 researchers all around the world so that they can share the data, and we are posting this information live in our website. Tomorrow, again, we will have this consultation and hopefully we will uncover more knowledge on this.
And if I could just add that the primary target of these products, of vaccines, is to prevent severe illness, hospitalization and death. And that is the measure, Kai, as you know, that we hold the vaccines against. We would always expect, especially with a mucosal infection like this, to see a drop-off in protection against infection over time. The question is, and I think your question was aimed at that, is to what extent do we see any loss in protection beyond neutralizing antibodies and looking at other immunologic markers and then looking at real world. And I don't know, Anna Maria, if we have any data on T-cell or other broader-based immunologic response, because the data from the previous question, again, some of the clinical data is pointing to, the vaccines are not failing at large. They seem to be providing a level of protection. The question is, how much protection are the current vaccines that we are using, which are currently life-saving against all the variants, to what extent do we lose any protection against severe illness and death against Omicron? The data is pointing towards there being significant protection, but as Anna Maria said, the data is not there to fully support a decision either way.
Yes, Dr. Ryan, thank you for reminding me to mention that there has been a review by Alexandro Setti and colleagues in lab that indicate that most of the T-cell epitopes are conserving the Omicron variant. This is very good news, and T-cell response may be very important for cross-protection and long-term protection, but the data is still moving. The other thing I want to say is there is a study from the UK, an observational study that was published and is highly commented, and as the authors of the study said in their discussion of their paper, their findings show that the effectiveness against symptomatic disease with the Omicron variant have declined, but they were unable to confirm that there was decrease in the protection against severe disease. So not only us, but the same authors of the study recognize the limitations. So we are still looking for additional data. Thank you.
Portugal, there are cases of Omicron contagion, but the number of deaths caused by the disease is low. Can you comment on the subject?
Probably very early days in Portugal, and again, many countries, I think of the 77 countries so far have confirmed, I think the DG used that number, and many more probably have the variant. What has happened in the countries that have the variant is we've seen very rapid spread and very rapid transmission and a very large number of cases being generated. So a bit like with the Delta wave, when you have a large number of cases, even if that disease, as Dr. Tedros said, is slightly milder in each individual, if you have a huge wave of cases, you will see a lot of severity and you will see hospital systems coming under pressure. And Dr. Tedros' message today is to act now. His message today is to look at your health systems in the coming weeks. Make sure you have the health workers in place. Make sure you have the clinical triage in place. Make sure you've got oxygen supplies in place. Make sure that you're vaccinating the unvaccinated. Make sure you're taking every opportunity individually and at community level to stop transmission where you can. It is very difficult. This is a highly transmissible variant. It's hard to stop it. But you can take the heat out of the transmission by doing the simple things: protecting yourself, protecting your family, protecting your community, avoiding crowded spaces, wearing a mask, ensuring good ventilation, washing your hands. And the governments need to support communities in doing that by putting in place layered measures that support communities in doing that and getting the health system ready. Health workers are exhausted. Many countries have lost up to 20% of their health workers. Health systems are weaker now than they were a year ago, in reality. So unfortunately, sometimes you can get up after the first punch, but it's very hard to get up after the second and third, and that's the difficulty. We're relying on health workers and a health system that have been weakened by this response, and Dr. Tedros' concern is that we don't be complacent. We don't wait for it to be overwhelmed by a wave of cases. We have some time to get better prepared and to make sure our systems are able to cope.
Some of the early data and the outbreak has occurred in very young age population, where they look at the data from the UK is between 2029. An early outbreak in South Africa was in university cluster. So the concentration of the age group may give some people false reassurance that's a milder. We don't know. The greatest risk for SARS-CoV, for COVID, has been age. So how do we protect our elderly population? At high-risk population would be very critical, as Mike said. We really need to prepare. How are we going to prepare the elderly care house? What are we message are we going to do? Is it testing? Is it restriction? A lot of the things, the risk, whether it's Omicron, Delta, remained age. So I think people are going this false sense that it may be milder. It has not been detected. We know again and again is the high risk and age. So let's not be focused on the data, the early data that's coming from either the UK or South Africa, which shows a milder. This is the population that was hit. If it goes to another population, we really don't know. So we are caught between two elephants of the Delta and the Omicron. So any of them the grass will suffer, and that the grass are the vulnerable population. So it is the dynamic, the virologists will use which one. But these are massive angry elephants, so don't take and prepare your system in protecting the vulnerables.
It's just coming back to boosters, because your SAGE group made it very clear last week. They said it should be the most vulnerable and not to hoard and let people who haven't been vaccinated at all go short. You're also talking now about preparing health systems. making sure the unvaccinated are vaccinated. I just wonder what kind of conversations you're having with governments like the UK's who are rolling out boosters for the entire population, or some of the European ones, or the US. I mean, would you tell them, for example, better to make vaccination mandatory for everyone who's said they're not having it at all than to roll out boosters? Would that be a way to go?
There's plenty data out there to show that there are differentials in vaccination in countries in vulnerable groups based on ethnicity, based on class, based on lots of other things that aren't about hesitancy. So this idea that the only people not vaccinated are the ones who don't want to be vaccinated, frankly, I've not found that in my career. Most of the time, it's the system hasn't found that person, or that person hasn't had enough confidence or access to the system. So I've said this again, and Dr. Tedros keeps saying it. It's about who we miss. It's not about counting up raw numbers of who we cover. It's about who we miss. If you miss vaccinating a vulnerable older person with the primary dose of this vaccine in any of these waves, that person is at much greater risk of being hospitalized or dying. That's a simple fact. How do we access them? And the system needs to redouble its effort to do that. People have genuine hesitancy. They have genuine concerns. We need to do better at offering people vaccines where they are, on their terms, using people who can communicate with them. It's very often about the motivation, what I perceive as the motivation of the person offering me the information. If I perceive that the person offering me a vaccine or offering me information about vaccine has my best interest in heart, if I trust that person, I'm more likely to accept that vaccine. There's been a gap and a gulf in trust. There's been a breakdown in trust, and we need to redouble our efforts to bridge that gap. And vaccinating those, making a double, triple, quadruple effort to vaccinate those individuals pays off better than chasing around the place trying to give booster vaccines to 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds. It's about priorities. The DG said it in a speech. Kate has spoken about it. It's about what is your priority. We've got a number of weeks now before the peak of this wave will probably hit. You can't do everything. So given choices in the system, what are your best options? What's the best choice to make with the resources you have? And that's what Dr. Tedros is saying. Vaccinate the unvaccinated, vulnerable people. That's a great choice. Try and suppress transmission. Try and prevent infection spreading at the rate it's spreading. Prepare your health system. Nobody is saying, and Dr. Tedros and myself and others are on the record, countries make national decisions and they are bound to protect their citizens. That's the primary duty of government. And therefore no one is criticizing directly the decision of a government made in good faith to protect its own population. The issue is sometimes those decisions create inequity at global level. That's what it drives. So you cannot live in a vacuum. An individual lives in a community lives in a country, and a country lives in the world. And any decision you make at any level can affect upwards or downwards. And we're just asking governments to look at priorities. Prioritize properly for your own population and look at the inequity. Look at how we need to prioritize those same vulnerable people in every country. It's exactly the same logic. So I think I wouldn't be saying to any government or any individual who's offered a booster today or tomorrow, I don't want any person out there who's offered a booster dose who's vulnerable to feel guilty about taking that dose. That is not what we're trying to do here. What Dr. Tedros is saying is there are millions of people who are completely unprotected in the world, and they are vulnerable, and they need to be given priority. It's about priorities, and I think we can do both. Frankly, I think we can do both. We can do two things at one time, and I think from our perspective, and there are governments out there like the UK who are trying their best to deal with the priorities of their own people and supporting very strongly international efforts to create equity in vaccine distribution.
What's also really clear is that in both highly vaccinated communities, countries, as well as in countries that have lower vaccination, the vast majority of people who are in hospital with severe disease, in hospital because of their COVID illness, are those who are unvaccinated. And that's true in countries with high vaccination rates. So it really is the unvaccinated who are putting the pressure on the healthcare system, and that, as Mike said, has to be the number one priority, especially for those that are in the highest risk group, those that remain unvaccinated. That's where the attention, the energy, then innovations about how to provide better access, how to provide better trust, how to provide better communication so that they can get vaccinated, they want to get vaccinated, they will get vaccinated. The other point is that as we roll into this winter season in the Northern Hemisphere, and as we work through what's happening with Omicron, we know that if there is going to be vaccine hoarding, we've been to this rodeo before. We know what happens when vaccine hoarding takes place. It does impact the ability of other countries to gain access to vaccines. And so we're also, as the DG has said, we are calling on manufacturers and countries who have been, the countries that have been donating doses to continue to put COVAX first, to continue to put AVAT first in those contracts, because the countries that have low vaccine coverage are not going to be able to vaccinate at scale, at pace, at the rate that they need to get those primary doses to people who are unvaccinated and who are still highly vulnerable.
Right, mbukele beku ngiwe ke labo baphathi benhlangano yakamhlaba yetempilo i-WHO basiniketa nje the latest updates ngawo umkhuhlane COVID-19 ekakhulukati luhlobo lolusha lesolutholakele luhlobo le-Omicron variant ikakhulukati nje kulamanye emave vele tinombolo sedivele seticalile kwenyuka abantu labathola lo mkhuhlane i-Omicron variant bebasiniketa ke lokutholakele noma mhlawumbe lucwaningo labasola balwenda ngawo lo mkhuhlane lomusha i-Omicron njengoba sivetile nje ukuthi ilivela lase-Netherlands lona lethi litawungena ku-full lockdown nyalo kulesikhathi sabo khisimusi bavetile ke ukuthi kusukela 24, 25, 26 December umndeni omunye kuvumeleke ukuthi abe netivakashi letimbili kuphela kuzama ukunciphisa ukuthelelana kwale ligciwane noma ke umkhuhlane lomusha ihlobo lolusha le-Omicron variant. Siphinde sikukhumbuze ke mbukeleki ukuthi ihlelo yakhona kubukela ku YouTube and of course siphinde sinikhumbuze ukuthi kusukela namuhla ngemsombuluko for 3 weeks luhlelo Kusile Breakfast Show litabeli ngena ngensimbi yesikhombisa ekseni kodwa kushaya insimbi yesiphohlongo kutawuba nje li-hour kuphela. Sithemba ukuthi nikuthokozele kuba nathi lo mhla ekseni sethemba ukuthi ndaba nelisuku loluhle.
You are watching Eswatini TV. Sibuko